For 40 years, I carried other people's mail to their doors in every kind of Iowa weather there is, the good news and the bad, the birthday cards and the funeral notices, and I never once in all that time missed a porch. So you will understand that there is a particular kind of cold in being left standing on a porch of your very own, on the welcome mat of a house your own money helped pay for, while your son-in-law explains to you, kindly and reasonably, why there is no longer quite enough room for you inside it. I am going to tell you about the evening I finally stepped down off that porch for good and walked away with the one thing they could not take from me. But first, you have to understand what it costs to hand a family everything you have and be handed back in return a place in line for the door. My name is Eileen. I am 66 years old, and I carried the mail on the same rural route outside our small town in Iowa for 40 years, up and down the gravel roads between the corn and the soybeans, past the same mailboxes for so long that I watched the children who waited at them grow up and have children who waited at them. I knew that whole county by its mail. I knew which house was getting letters from a boy stationed overseas, and which widow's mail had started quietly stacking up in the box because she had stopped coming out to get it, which was how I would know to knock, and sometimes how I would be the one to find that something was wrong. I was not just the mail lady. On a rural route over 40 years, you become a thread that ties a scattered place together, the one reliable face that comes up every single driveway, rain or blizzard or grief. I spent my whole working life making sure that what mattered got delivered to the right door. And I will tell you the bitter joke of this whole story right at the start. The one door I could never quite get delivered to, in the end, was my own daughter's. That route was never just a job to me, though I would have been embarrassed to call it a calling out loud. 40 years, the same gravel roads, and I knew things about that county nobody else knew, because mail tells you everything if you pay attention. I knew when a marriage was in trouble by the certified letters. I knew a baby was coming by the catalogs. I was the one who noticed when old Mr. Peeper's mail sat 3 days untouched in the box, and I knocked, and then I called for help, and they found him on his kitchen floor, still breathing, just barely. And his daughter sent me a card every Christmas for the rest of his life that said only, "Thank you for noticing. Thank you for noticing." That was what I did for a living. I noticed people. I was the one who came up the long driveway when nobody else did, who kept the lonely and the forgotten tied to the world by one thin, reliable thread. I gave that to strangers for 40 years, faithfully, in every storm there was. So you will feel the particular irony of what I am about to tell you, which is that the one person who stopped noticing me, who let me sit forgotten at the end of the table in plain sight, was the daughter I had given everything to. If you have ever given everything you had to the people you love, and then been quietly treated as a burden for needing anything at all in return, then I think you already know the particular ache I am about to carry up the driveway. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, and whether you have ever been made to feel like a guest, or worse, in a family you gave your whole self to build. I read every single one. There are more of us standing out here on the porch than you would ever think. Let me tell you how I ended up there, because I did not get pushed out all at once. It happened the way the cold gets into a house in October, one little draft at a time, until one day you realize you have been freezing for months. My husband, Don, passed 7 years back, and after a while in our empty house, I made what felt at the time like the most loving and sensible decision of my life. My daughter Stephanie and her husband Brett were looking to buy a bigger house, and they could not quite swing it, and I had our paid-off home and Don's life insurance and 40 years of a careful woman's savings. So I sold the house Don and I had built our life in, and I put nearly every dollar I had into helping them buy a big, beautiful place out on the edge of town, with the understanding, spoken out loud at the kitchen table with everyone nodding, that I would have a room there and a place in that family for the rest of my days. It seemed like the natural order of things. You pour into your children, and they hold you at the end. That is the deal our whole lives are supposed to run on. I signed away my independence and moved into the back bedroom of that big house, and I thought I was moving into the safest harbor of my old age. I was 60 years old, and I had just handed a man named Brett the keys to the rest of my life, and I did not know it yet. Don and I had built that little house ourselves, near enough. 40 years of paint and repairs and his tomatoes in the garden out back. When he passed, that house was the last warm place that still held the shape of him. His chair, his workbench, the pencil marks on the kitchen door frame where we measured Stephanie every single birthday. And I sold it. I need you to feel the weight of that, because Brett and Stephanie never once did. I did not just give them money. I sold the last house my husband's hands had ever touched. I let strangers paint over my daughter's growth chart on that doorframe, because I believed I was buying my way into the warm center of my own family for the years I had left. I traded the house that held my whole past for a back bedroom in a house I thought held my future. It was the largest leap of faith I have ever made, and I made it gladly, with my whole heart. And I handed it to two people at a kitchen table who nodded and promised. And then, the moment the money cleared the bank, began the slow, polite work of forgetting they had promised anything at all. I want to be fair to Brett, because the easy way to tell this is with a villain, and the true way has a smaller, sadder thing in it than a villain. Brett is not a cruel man in the way you see in movies. Brett is a man made entirely out of how things look. He grew up with nothing, and he is ashamed of it down to his bones. And he has spent his whole adult life building a picture of a successful, self-made, important man. The big house, the right truck, the right friends. And that picture is the realest thing in the world to him, realer than the people in it. And I, his wife's mother, the retired mail lady in sensible shoes who actually paid for a third of his beautiful picture, was a problem for the image. I was a reminder of the humble place he came from and could not stand to be reminded of. I was not a person to Brett. I was a smudge on the photograph he was trying to show the world. And a man like that does not rage at a smudge. He just quietly, patiently, works to wipe it out of the frame. It started so politely. My chair at the table, the one I had always sat in, somehow became the chair where Brett's important guests sat, and I was eased to the end. The things I cooked, the recipes Stephanie grew up on, were gently phased out for the kind of food that looked better when Brett's friends came, and my offers to cook were met with a tight little smile and a "no thank you. Eileen, we've got it handled." My grandson Mason, who I will tell you about because he is the light in all this, would come sit in my room and tell me about his day. And I started to notice the way Brett did not quite like that. The way he would find a reason to call Mason out, as though my back bedroom were a place the boy needed protecting from. I was being unthreaded, slowly, the same way I had spent 40 years watching lonely people get unthreaded from the world, one missed connection at a time. And every time I felt it and tried to name it, even gently, even just to Stephanie, the answer was always the same. I was imagining it. I was being sensitive. I was so lucky to have a family that took me in. Did I know how many women my age had nowhere to go? That last one was the masterstroke, because it took the thing I had paid for and recast it as charity I should be grateful for. I had bought my way into that house with everything I owned, and they had me thanking them for the privilege of being slowly shown the door. I will give you the night I understood my exact rank in that house. Brett had important people over, some men from the firm he was forever trying to impress, and I came out to say hello and offered, the way I always had, to help in the kitchen. And Brett steered me by the elbow, smiling for his guests, back toward my room and said, low, just for me, "Why don't you let us handle the grown-up evening, Eileen? Go on and get yourself comfortable." The grown-up evening. I was 64 years old. I had raised a daughter mostly on my own through 100 grown-up evenings. I had driven a mail truck through blizzards that would have sent those firm men crying for their mothers. And I was being sent to my room like a child who might embarrass the host. And I went. That is the part I am least at peace with. I went to my room, and I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the laughter I was not good enough for in the house I had paid a third of, and I told myself it was fine. I was tired anyway. That is exactly how it works. They make you small so gently and so steadily that you begin folding yourself up to fit the size they have assigned you, and you call it keeping the peace. And you do not even notice the day you agreed to vanish. Mason was the one thread they could never quite cut, though Lord knows Brett tried. That boy and I understood each other from the time he was tiny. He was a watcher, like me, a noticer, the kind of quiet child who sees everything in a room and says very little. And the two of us would sit in my back bedroom, and he would tell me the things he did not tell his parents. And I would listen the way I had listened to a whole county for 40 years. In a house that was busy turning me into a piece of furniture, Mason kept right on treating me like a person, kept seeking me out, and I have come to think that is the very thing Brett could not stand. Because a 15-year-old's loyalty is the one kind of evidence a man building a false picture cannot argue away. Children see the truth before they learn to be polite about it. Mason saw exactly what was being done to his grandmother, and unlike every grown adult in that house, he had not yet learned to call it by a nicer name than what it was. There was a particular evening that I knew, the way you just know, that the draft had become a season. I overheard Brett on the phone in his office, not even bothering to lower his voice much, talking to someone about looking into places. Nice places, he said, for Eileen. Somewhere she'd be more comfortable and have people her own age. And Stephanie's voice in there, too, smaller, saying, "But Brett, where would the money even?" And Brett saying, "We'll figure it out. She can't stay here forever. It's not working. It's not working." As though I were an appliance, as though the woman who had emptied her life savings into the walls around him were a thing that had stopped working and needed to be dealt with. I stood in that hallway, 66 years old, and I understood that the plan was to move me out of the house I had paid for and into a facility, on whatever was left of my own money, so that Brett could have his picture back clean. And the worst part, the part that took the air out of me, was that my own daughter was in that room, and her only objection was about the money. I did not sleep that night. I lay in the back bedroom, in the dark, in the house I had poured my savings into, and I listened to the furnace I had helped pay for cycle on and off. And I felt something I had never once felt in all my 40 years on the route, through every storm and every hard delivery. I felt like a piece of mail that had been stamped returned to sender, undeliverable, a thing to be processed out and shipped away. I had spent my whole life making certain that what mattered reached the right hands, and here I was, at 66, about to be quietly rerouted out of my own family's house, and the person handling the paperwork was the daughter whose growth chart I had let strangers paint right over. You can survive almost anything in this life, I have found, except the silence of the people who were supposed to hold you. That silence is the coldest porch there is. I have thought a great deal about that particular trick, the one where they turn the thing you gave into a gift they gave you, because I have come to believe it is one of the most quietly destroying things one person can do to another. I had handed them my house, my husband's house, my whole security, freely, out of love, And by the time Brett was finished reframing it, I had become the lucky old woman they had so generously taken in, who really ought to be grateful, who certainly had no business making demands of anyone. They did not just take my money, they took the very meaning of what I had done, the love that was in it, and they handed it back to me upside down as a debt I owed them. If you have ever given everything to someone and then found yourself, somehow, apologizing to them for needing anything at all, then you have met this trick too. And I want you to know that it is a trick. Your generosity is not a debt. The love you gave does not make you a beggar at the door. They only need you to believe that it does, so that you will quietly hand over the last thing you have left, which is your right to be treated as a human being. I almost went quietly. I want you to know that, because if you are standing on your own porch right now, you need to know how close I came. I am a practical woman. I told myself I was old, that I was dependent, that I had signed it all over, and so I had no standing left to make a fuss. That maybe a place with people my own age really would be more comfortable. That making trouble would only cost me my daughter and my grandson, the only family I had left. For a few weeks, I went small and quiet and agreeable, the way I imagine you do too, and I started to let it happen. Because when you have given everything away, it is very easy to believe you have given away your right to want anything at all. I had spent 40 years being the reliable one who never caused a fuss on anybody's route. I figured I would be reliable about my own disappearance too. What turned me was a small thing, the way the things that turn us always are. It was Mason, my grandson, 15 years old, came and sat on the end of my bed one night, and he was quiet for a while. And then he said, "Grandma, are they really going to make you leave?" And I started to give him the calm, grown-up answer, the one about how it might be nicer for me somewhere else. And he looked at me with the clear, terrible honesty that only a 15-year-old has left. And he said, "That's not true. This is your house. You bought it. Why does everybody act like you're a guest?" And out of the mouth of that boy came the one true sentence nobody in that family of grown adults would say out loud. Why does everybody act like you're a guest? And I realized, looking at him, that if I let them quietly erase me, the lesson that boy would learn is that this is what you do to the people who love you most once they have outlived their usefulness. That this is what family is. A thing that holds you only as long as you are not inconvenient. I had been willing to disappear for my own sake. I was not willing to teach Mason that disappearing was right. So I stopped being quiet. And I did it the way a careful woman does, which is not with a scene, but with a spine. The next morning, I did something I had not done in the 7 years since I moved in. I called the bank, and I called the title company, and I made certain of what I already knew, which was that I had the paperwork, all of it, every record of the money I had put into that house, kept careful the way a woman who handled official mail for 40 years keeps things. I was on the deed, not Brett, me, alongside Stephanie. Brett, in all his careful picture building, had let his name stay off the very house he ruled, because at the time it had been about qualifying for the loan, and he had simply never imagined the old mail lady would ever remember she had any power at all. I had given my money in love, but I had, thank God, signed it in ink. And ink, I have learned in this life, outlasts a great many promises made at a kitchen table. You want to know what 40 years of handling official mail does to a woman? It makes her keep her paperwork. While Brett had been busy building a picture, I had been, out of pure, lifelong habit, keeping a record. Every wire transfer, the closing documents, the deed with my own name typed right there beside my daughter's, plain as a return address. I had not saved those papers as a weapon. I want to be clear about that. I had saved them because keeping the record is simply who I am. the way some people cannot leave a bed unmade. But when the cold in that house finally got bad enough that I went looking, there it all was, in a folder, in my own careful hand. The whole truth of what I had given and what I still legally held. Brett had spent 7 years certain that the sweet old mail lady would never remember she had any power at all. He had counted on my forgetting. What he never understood is that I had spent 4 decades being the one person in that entire county who never once forgot a single address. I always knew exactly where everything was supposed to go, myself included. I did not threaten anybody. That is not who I am. And besides, I had learned 40 years ago that the quiet delivery is the one that lands. I simply told Stephanie and Brett, at that same kitchen table where the promise had first been made, that I had been thinking, and that I would not be going to any facility, and that since the house was a third mine in money and half mine on the deed, I had decided what was fairest for everyone was that I would take my share, in cash or in a sale, and find my own small place in town where I could live as my own woman and not as a smudge in anybody's photograph. And I watched Brett's face, the careful picture builder, do the math in real time. The realization washing over him that the house he had been about to throw me out of could not survive me actually leaving. That without my third, he and Stephanie could not carry the mortgage. That the whole beautiful image was mortared together with the savings of the woman he had been quietly shopping into a home. The smudge, it turned out, was load-bearing. Now here is where it went the way I did not plan, and where I had to make the choice that I am proudest of in this whole long life. Because word gets around a small town, and it got around fast. And not because I said one word, but because of an outsider, of all things. The realtor Brett had quietly contacted about selling months before to cash me out, ran into Stephanie at the grocery store and said brightly, in front of half the town, "Oh, did your mother's situation get sorted out? Such a shame, after she put so much into that house." And in that one moment, in the cereal aisle, the whole picture Brett had spent 7 years building developed in front of the neighbors like film in a tray. The successful, self-made man who had been about to put his own mother-in-law out of the house she paid for. People talk, and they did. And in a town like ours, where I had carried the mail to nearly every door for 40 years, where everybody knew Eileen, the story did not break Brett's way. Not even a little. What I did not expect was the way the town closed around me, quietly, the same way I had spent 40 years closing around them. The week I moved into my little place, my old root showed up. Not in a parade, nothing showy. That is not how Iowa does a thing like this. Just a casserole left on the new porch from the Hendricksons out on Route 2. A man I had delivered to for 30 years appearing to fix my sagging back step without being asked, saying only, "You got my mail through the blizzard of '78. Eileen, this is the least I can do." The widow whose husband I had once found on the kitchen floor sent her grandson over to mow my grass. I had spent 4 decades being the thread that tied that scattered county together, asking nothing of anybody. And it turned out the county had been keeping a quiet record of its own, the way a good community always does. And the moment I finally needed catching, 100 small hands I had served without a thought reached out at once. You do not always get to see the good you put into the world, but it is out there, humming in the wires, waiting. And sometimes when you finally fall, you discover it had been a net under you the whole time. And here is the thing. I had it in my hand. In that moment, the chance to finish him. I could have told every door on my old route exactly what Brett had done, and Brett knew it. And for a few weeks, he walked around that town braced for me to do it, because it is what he would have done. I had 40 years of goodwill and 40 years of trusted relationships and the whole truth on my side. and I could have buried that man in the eyes of every person whose opinion he had built his entire self on. And I want to tell you that I sat with that power, and I held it, and I chose to set it down. Not because Brett deserved mercy, he did not particularly. I set it down because of who I would have had to become to use it, and because Mason was watching, and because I had spent 40 years carrying other people's bad news to their doors, and I knew what it does to a town to deliver ruin, even deserved ruin. I did not need to destroy Brett to be free of him. I just needed to walk off the porch. So I let the town's own quiet knowing be his punishment, which in a small town is plenty. And I kept my mouth shut, and I moved out, and I did not say one cruel word on my way through the door. That is not weakness. I want to be clear about that. Choosing not to swing the hammer when the hammer is right there in your hand and heavy and earned, that is the strongest thing I have ever done. I need to tell you why I set that hammer down. Because I have come to believe it matters more than anything else in this whole story. It was not that I had forgiven Brett, not then, and maybe not even now. It was that I had spent 40 years watching what happens to a town when bad news arrives at the door. I had delivered the certified letters and the foreclosure notices and the worst telegrams a person ever gets. And I had seen the faces. And I knew that ruin, even when it is earned, even when it is perfectly just, leaves a mark on the one who delivers it as surely as on the one who receives it. I did not want to become a woman who had destroyed a man, even a man who had it coming, because I have seen up close that you cannot hand someone their ruin without getting some of it on your own 2 hands forever. And there was Mason, watching, learning from me what a wronged person does when power finally lands in her grip. I could teach that boy that you crush the people who hurt you the second you get the chance. Or I could teach him that the strongest thing a person can do is hold the hammer, feel the full earned weight of it, and choose to set it down and simply walk free. I wanted to be the second kind of grandmother, so that is the kind I decided to be. People hear this story and they assume the victory was the deed, the leverage, the money I got back in the end. It was not. The money only bought the little house. The real victory was something you cannot write on any deed, and it is the thing I carried down off that porch in both my hands. I had given everything and been treated like nothing, and I did not walk out of that house bitter, and I did not walk out broken, and I did not walk out having turned cruel to match the cruelty done to me. I walked out still myself, still the woman who noticed people, who got the mail through, who would far rather be wronged than become a person who wrongs. They took my money for a while, and they took my chair, and they very nearly took my place in my own family. But the one thing they were never able to take, the thing I would not hand over no matter how small they made me feel, was the particular kind of woman I had spent 66 years choosing to be. You can lose a house. You can lose your savings and your chair, and even, for a while, your own daughter. You cannot lose your dignity. You can only give it away. And I had finally learned to stop giving mine to people who had never once earned it. I took my share, and I bought myself a little place in town, a small old house with a good porch and a mail slot in the door that I get a quiet kick out of every single day. I live there as my own woman now. And the ending I did not expect is the one with my daughter in it. Because Stephanie, freed from being caught between her husband's picture and her mother's dignity, finally had to look at what had almost happened and what it had nearly made her into. And it broke something open in her. She came to my little house, alone, and she sat on my new porch and she cried. And she said, "Mama, I let him make me somebody who was going to do that to you, and I do not know how I got here." And I will tell you what I told her, because it is the whole heart of this. I told her that the woman who would put her own mother out was not who she was. It was only who she was becoming in that house, in that picture. And that the proof she was still herself was that she was sitting on my porch, unable to live with it. We are mending, Stephanie and I, slowly, on a new footing, the footing of two grown women instead of a burden and her keeper. It was not quick with Stephanie, and I would not have trusted it if it had been. For a while she was defensive, and then she was ashamed, and then she got somewhere realer than either of those. And we had some hard talks on my new porch, the talks we should have had years before, about how she had learned somewhere along the way to measure her own worth by whether a hard man approved of her, the very same way I had once measured mine. We are more alike than either of us ever wanted to admit, my daughter and me, both of us trained from girlhood to disappear quietly so a man could stay comfortable. The only difference is that I got to be 66 and finally refuse it, and she got to stand there and watch me do it. And watching me step down off that porch with my head held up did something for her that 50 lectures never could have. You cannot simply tell your daughter to value herself. You can only show her, late and imperfectly, what it looks like in the flesh. And pray she is still young enough to learn it by heart. Stephanie is learning it. That may be the truest thing my leaving ever bought. Mason comes and stays weekends, and we make the recipes Brett phased out. Brett and Stephanie are working out what they are to each other now, with the picture cracked and the truth in the open. And that is theirs to sort, not mine. I gave my daughter back her freedom by refusing to be the price she paid for his approval. I delivered mail for 40 years. So let me leave you with the truest thing the root ever taught me. Everybody wants the good envelopes, the cards and the checks and the letters that smell like perfume. But I learned, over 40 years and 10,000 doors, that the measure of a person is not how they treat the good mail. It is how they treat the carrier. It is how they treat the faithful one who comes up the driveway every single day in the sleet, asking for nothing, just doing the quiet work of keeping everyone connected. If your family has started treating you like a smudge on their picture, like a thing to be handled, like a guest in a house you helped build, I am 66 years old, and I am here to tell you that you do not have to make a scene, and you do not have to burn anyone down to be free. You only have to remember that you are not a burden. You are the carrier. You are the one who held it all together, up every driveway, through every storm. And a person like that is never, ever the one who should be standing out in the cold. Step off the porch if you have to. Take what is yours and go build a door of your own. And when you get the chance to destroy the one who wronged you, and you will hold that hammer in your hand. Remember that walking away with your dignity makes a far better sound than the hammer ever could. I would know. I have heard both. I chose the quiet, and it is the loudest thing I have ever done.